BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says the situation in the besieged port of Mariupol is both dire and heartbreaking. He said Ukrainian soldiers and civilians remain trapped inside, with no humanitarian corridor in place. Russian forces have pulverized the port city for weeks. Some Ukrainian defenders are still holed up in a vast steelworks next to the Sea of Azov, defying Russia's demand that they surrender. Speaking to CBS News, Mr. Kuleba said Moscow was determined to destroy Mariupol.
The city doesn't exist anymore. The remainings of the Ukrainian army and large group of civilians are basically encircled by the Russian forces. They continue their struggle. But it seems from the way Russian army behaves in Mariupol, they decided to raze the city to the ground at any cost.
Our correspondent in Kiev, Anna Foster, says control of the port city remains crucial for both countries.
For Russia, it would create essentially a land corridor between Russia and annexed Crimea, and that is why they are fighting so hard for Mariupol. It would be important for their land corridor. It would also be important in terms of the economy of Ukraine. It would mean that Russia controlled a lot of the Ukrainian coastline, those important cities. It would make it very difficult for Ukraine to export things like iron and steel and corn, much of which comes from Mariupol.
For the first time since the start of the war in Ukraine, Polish migration figures indicate more people are returning to the country through Poland than are leaving. Increasing numbers have been returning since Russian forces withdrew from territory north of the capital, Kiev. On Saturday, about 19,000 arrived in Poland from Ukraine, but 22,000 travelled the other way. Pope Francis has used his traditional Easter message to criticise the Russian invasion of Ukraine and to call for peace. Here's Harry Farley.
Around 100,000 people packed into St. Peter's Square in Rome for the first time since the pandemic. The Pope maintained his policy of not naming Russia explicitly, but he said Ukraine had been dragged into a cruel and senseless conflict, and, to applause from the crowd, called for peace.
In this terrible night of suffering and death, may a new dawn of new hopes appear. Let there be a decision for peace.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he's invited President Macron of France to Ukraine to see for himself that Russian forces have committed genocide. Mr. Macron has avoided using the term, saying that it needs to be defined legally and not by politicians. Mr. Zelensky said the French president did not want to end his diplomatic engagement with Russia. World News from the BBC. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has told his Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas that he strongly condemns Israeli intervention against worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Despite recent efforts by both Turkey and Israel to normalise strained relations, he said on Twitter, Turkey always stands with Palestine. Clashes have taken place for a fourth day in a number of Swedish cities, sparked by the apparent burning of a Quran by a far-right anti-immigrant group. David Bamford has this report.
Local media in the Swedish city of Norrköping said 3 people have been injured when police fired warning shots at rioters. Several vehicles were set on fire and at least 17 people were arrested. On Saturday, vehicles, including a bus, were set ablaze in the southern city of Malmö during a rally by far-right activists. The governments of Iran and Iraq summoned Swedish envoys to issue protests after the Danish-Swedish extremist Rasmus Paludan said he had burned Islam's most sacred text.
The French far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen and several members of her party have been accused by the EU's anti-fraud body of embezzling more than €600,000 while serving as members of the European Parliament. None is accused of profiting directly, but of claiming the funds as expenses. Ms Le Pen will face Emmanuel Macron in the second round of the French presidential election in a week. A 300-metre-long cargo vessel that became stuck off the US East Coast a month ago has finally been refloated. The US Coast Guard said the Ever Forward was now slowly sailing out of Chesapeake Bay. It's the sister ship of the Ever Given, which last year blocked the Suez Canal in Egypt for 6 days, disrupting world trade. BBC News.